week 3 of the fantasy football season, and his running back sits this week. The first start, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So the Jaguars coming off a tough ball game and a tough loss versus the Kansas City Chiefs in week 2. They just got away from the run early and often in that one. A lot of dropbacks and passing by Trevor Lawrence. And I think this week here, Etienne in a good matchup versus the Houston Texans could get back on track after a good week 1 and have a good ball game. We just saw Zach Moss go for 20-plus fantasy points in PPR leagues. So I think Etienne in this offense, they simplified a little bit this week here. He's a good runner of the football as Etienne. He's got breakaway speed. And this week here versus Houston, he's a start. For me, the next start's Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So right now, Nick Chubb out for the season with the devastating knee injury. And it was hard to watch, obviously. But Jerome Ford, he came in and he put up solid numbers here after the injury for Chubb, including a 69-yard run where he got stopped at the 1-yard line where Pierre Strong then vultured the run. But Jerome Ford came in the ball game. He showed he could catch the ball out of the backfield with a receiving touchdown early and then rushing over 106 yards, like I mentioned. So right now, Kareem Hunt definitely could be brought back in here, obviously, for this Cleveland Brown team. He knows the system. He's still a free agent, hasn't signed anywhere. But even if he does, I think we could see a split. And even if Hunt's back, who knows if he's in shape right now. If he's been... Because it's one thing to be in shape and another thing to be in football shape. Because if you take that first hit, obviously, that's where things change. But right now, Jerome Ford versus the Tennessee Titans, I could see him have a good ball game. And he's a good catcher out of the backfield, like I mentioned. And obviously, the pickup of the week right now at the running back position. Next running back's Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. Jahmyr Gibbs, he might get an expanded role. And that's what fantasy owners have been looking for here out of Gibbs the first couple weeks. David Montgomery, we know they signed in the offseason. He's been getting majority of the carries, where Gibbs has been the working and passing downs back for this Lion team. But we know he's got explosive speed. We know he can make plays in the open field. And now if Montgomery's out a few weeks with the hip injury, where he said it's going to take him a few weeks to heal, even though head coach Dan Campbell said Montgomery's day-to-day, but either way in a matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons, even if Montgomery plays, I think Gibbs, we're going to see more work out of him. He's an explosive running back, and they're not going to draft a running back at number 12 overall is this Lion team just to sit for most of the ball game. They can only get 7 to 10 touches. So I think this week the playbook expands more here for Gibbs, and especially if David Montgomery's out. This guy, imagine what he could do with 20 touches, because right now with 7 to 10 touches, he's putting up 8 and then 12 fantasy points in PPR league. So right now, Gibbs could definitely be on the verge of a monster breakout if Montgomery's out. And this week versus the Falcons, I think he could do it if he gets an expanded role. Next back's Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So Williams, he had a good week 1. I said he was the top pickup off the wire at the running back position. And then in week 2, he didn't disappoint in a very tough matchup versus the San Francisco 49ers. He went for 28 fantasy points in PPR league. So right now, he could do everything here as Kyren Williams. He could catch the ball out of the backfield. He could run in between the tackles. And that's another reason Cam Akers. But as of now, recording this, he hasn't gone anywhere as Cam Akers. But anyway, Kyren Williams is the number 1 man over there. They got a good matchup at the Cincinnati Bengals, where the Baltimore Ravens ran the football well with Justice Hill and Gus Edwards. So right now that he's a dual threat out of the backfield, Kyren Williams, he could be a top 15, top 20 running back remainder of the season as long as he's healthy and remains being the man over there. Next back's Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, he didn't get huge workload. Obviously, it was him and Justice Hill pretty much a split over there in Baltimore, but he still ran for 6 yards a carry and found the end zone. And this week here, it's a good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts, where I think the Ravens get off to an early start and an early lead, where Gus Edwards, he's going to chew the clock up in the third and fourth quarter and get a decent amount of attempts, I believe, and a goal line touchdown as well. So Gus Edwards is a top 24 option each and every week. I think he could be a number 2 running back for fantasy owners or a flex option. So this week here, with a pretty solid matchup versus Indianapolis, like I said, where the Ravens should go up early and often and take a lead, and he runs out the clock in the second half. He's a start for me this week. Next start's James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So coming into the season, I thought James Cook would be the man, and with an expanded role and being a starting running back, we've seen it so far with James Cook having some solid ball games. He could catch the ball out of the backfield. He could run in between the tackles. We saw him get over 100 yards in the last ball game for this Buffalo Bill team versus the Raiders. And this week he had the Washington Commanders. I think he could have a good game. This Commander front line, I know, is a pretty solid front line, obviously, but James Cook's in a good offense. And obviously offenses, they're going to try to stop Josh Allen where things could open up for Cook. So this week here going to Washington, I think James Cook has another good ball game, and he's got top 15, top 20 potential the remainder of the season as well. Next back's Breece Hall of the New York Jets. So this Jet team, they just got to go back to basics. I know they want to throw the football and get cute a little bit and see what Zach Wilson has, but he's not Aaron Rodgers, obviously. Tough matchup it was in week 2 versus the Dallas Cowboys, but to only give Breece Hall 4 carries in that 1 and 9 yards, you're not going to get anything out of him, obviously, versus a tough defense and not giving him time to warm up. So this week here, with all the criticism and even Breece Hall saying himself that he didn't get enough touches in the ball game, which is obvious to everyone, you're not going to give a running back with this star potential only 4 carries. So this week here, I think they go back to it. You could run on New England pretty decently. We saw week 1, Kenneth Gainwell had a decent game. And then we saw last week Raheem Mostert go over 100 yards rushing and scored 2 touchdowns. So I think this week here, this Jet team, they go to the run game more. And Breece Hall is definitely going to pay off in this one. And the final running back I would start this week's Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So Pollard coming off a career-high 32 touches in that ball game versus the New York Jets. And that Jet defense, one of the better defenses in the league, but Pollard, just on volume alone, put up numbers. And this week here at Arizona, he has potential to be a top 5 running back in fantasy points this week. Here's Pollard. Arizona, fast track. Saw Saquon Barkley come off a big ball game. And this Cowboy team, they could get off to an early lead this week where they're running the football a whole lot. So right now, with a good matchup, good offensive line for this Cowboy team, and indoor ball game once again, I think Tony Pollard has a good one. And obviously, he's a star for me with top 5 potential this week. Now to the sit side of things, Khalil Herbert, he's a sit for me. So far, it's been a mess over there in the backfield for the Chicago Bear team, and they're one of the worst offensive lines as well. So this Kansas City Chief team, they obviously could get off to a monster start, and this could be a ball game where they abandon the run and put the ball in Justin Fields' hand and see if he could make magic out of things. But right now, Khalil Herbert, I know he could catch the ball out of the backfield, but this week at Kansas City, I obviously can't trust him, and he's a sit. Now to Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook, in my opinion, his better days are behind him. Obviously, he was on the free agent market for a while after the Minnesota Vikings cut him loose and the New York Jets brought him in. But so far in the first 2 weeks, we haven't seen anything out of Dalvin Cook where I would be a fantasy owner and say, yeah, I'll put him in the starting lineup. So far, I know on paper it was 2 tough matchups versus a good Buffalo front line. And the Cowboys, who we know is one of the better defenses, if not the best in the league. But right now, Dalvin Cook, you can't trust him. His yards per carry haven't been anything. And last week, he lost a fumble as well. So right now, I think in this ball game, Jets are going to go with Breece Hall. And this Patriot defense, I know it's not what it once was, but it's a tough matchup as well, in my opinion. Even though, like I said early in the video, Mostert went off on this defense. But I think it's going to be a Breece Hall game, if anything. Next back's Miles Sanders of the Carolina Panthers. Coming into the year, I thought Miles Sanders wouldn't do much, even though we know he's the starting running back over there for this Carolina Panther team. But even last season in a high-powered offense like the Philadelphia Eagles, there were a lot of ball games where Sanders didn't do much. And that's what we're going to see again this week here at Seattle, where they're going to trail early and often, I believe, is this Carolina Panther team. Sanders, he's not that great of a receiver out of the backfield. Chuba Hubbard is more the receiving back and a guy with more explosiveness, in my opinion. But anyway, Miles Sanders, I know week 1 he did get 11 fantasy points, but in the past week, in week 2, he only had 7 fantasy points. So this week, it's tough to trust Sanders. And with all these waiver wire options in week 1, now week 2 here, guys like Jerome Ford, Matt Breida, Kyron Williams, a lot of running backs out there on the wire. I just can't trust Miles Sanders in this one. Next, it's Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Najee Harris, the first 2 weeks of the season, I said to sit him, and he just looks done, Najee Harris. I know it's only his 3rd season in the league, but the explosiveness isn't there. Jalen Warren definitely looks like the better running back who could do a little bit of everything over there. Catch the ball out of the backfield, get yards after catch, and run in between the tackles. So right now, I know it's a pretty decent matchup at the Vegas Raiders here for Najee Harris, but I just don't see him doing much in this one. Like I said, the explosiveness isn't there. Offensive line isn't all that good. And I know Kenny Pickett as well. Defenses aren't scared of Pickett to beat them, where they stack the box. Passing game try to beat them. So right now I see the same type of thing. And yes, Harris could have a good ball game where he could get 10, 12 fantasy points possibly, but where people drafted him second, third round, he wasn't a player I was interested in coming into the season. And so far the first 2 weeks, he hasn't done anything for fantasy owners. Next back's James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So last week, James Conner, he was running that football great, and he was running guys over left and right in that ball game. But this week here, he's got a tough task here with the Dallas Cowboys coming to town. And so far, this Dallas Cowboy defense, they're out for blood so far in the early going. So far, only giving up 10 points in the first 2 ball games. We saw in week 2, Dalvin Cook and Breece Hall didn't do anything on the ground. And in week 1, Saquon Barkley, he wasn't a factor as well in that one. So right now, James Conner, it's going to be a tough ball game here for versus this Cowboy team. And if this Cowboy team gets off to an early start, they're going to abandon the run, even though I know Conner's a good receiver out of the backfield. But right now, with a tough matchup and a pretty bad offensive line over there in Arizona, one of the best pass rushes in the league coming, it's going to be a tough ball game, and it's going to be tough to start Conner. In my opinion, the next back's Matt Breida of the New York Giants, and now Saquon Barkley out 3 weeks, and Matt Breida most likely going to be the man over there in the backfield, possibly with Brightwell splitting carries. But anyway, tough matchup at the 49ers, even though we know Kyron Williams came off a monster fantasy game with 28 fantasy points in PPR leagues, but Matt Breida is not an explosive back like he once was. And now I know it's versus one of his former teams, but this week here versus that tough defensive line for the San Francisco 49ers, and a quick turnaround on Thursday Night Football, and this Giant offensive line not that good here. It's tough to trust Breida, but definitely on the waiver wire. If he's still out there after waivers have ended now, go out there and get him. But right now as a start this week, that's not happening, and I have him as a sit. The next sit's Alexander Mattison of the Minnesota Vikings. So Mattison, coming into the year, I thought he'd be a decent running back. I know it's only 2 weeks, but so far we haven't seen anything out of Alexander Mattison, and I think Ty Chandler could start working into Madison's workload, especially on passing down. So right now, this Minnesota Viking team obviously is a pass-first type of team, where you got weapons like Justin Jefferson, T.J. Hawkinson, and the rookie Jordan Addison can play so far in the early going. But anyway, right now, Alexander Madison's not a running back I could trust. Offensive line's not blocking as well great for him. And like I said, Ty Chandler could be a running back that we could see earn his way into a role in this offense, especially on passing down. So this week, even with a pretty solid matchup versus the Chargers, where you could run the football on like we've seen in the first couple weeks here, he's a sit for me. And the final running back I would sit's Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. I know Brian Robinson the first 2 weeks here, he's looked very good in the early going, but it's a very tough matchup versus the Buffalo Bills, where the Bills in the first 2 weeks here, they pretty much shut everything down except Breece Hall in that first game. Had a monster game, but most of his 127 yards came on an 84-yard run. Then last week they shut down Josh Jacobs to -2 rushing yards. So Brian Robinson, we know he had a monster ball game with over 80 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns last week, and a few catches as well for this Washington Commander team. But right here, it's going to be a tough matchup where they could be trailing early and often as Washington, even though I know last week they were, where they make them one-dimensional, and Antonio Gibson, we know, is the passing downs back. So Brian Robinson, I know most people are probably going to play him after the first 2 good weeks he's had, but with a tough matchup, I could see a decline in numbers and not much out of him, especially if I could see the game script going the way it could. So right now, that's a few running backs start sit for week 3 of the fantasy football season.